Welcome back to the Sean. This is not the Sean Trey Show. This is my Growing Money with Sean Trey's podcast. I have a really interesting guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm Nigel Bloomfield, and I don't do finances full time. I have a day job.
That's awesome.
Mostly, I got into this because we had to. We we had to figure out how to change our money habits, and we ended up figuring out a way to budget that was pretty interesting and different. So we ended up writing a book about it, and it's just me and my wife figuring it out as we went. And it's been a really good experience.
See,
so,
that's
yeah. It's different.
I love that.
I know some of your other guests have been people who have do this full time and professionally, and like that wasn't me.
No, that's awesome because I prefer that sometimes because it's like I'm in the same boat. I don't have a degree. I'm not a professional personal finance person. I am a dad who's sitting here who grew up with poor money habits, who's now having to whose money habits continued into adult life. And now I've got this little 8-year-old that who's asking me these questions about money, and I'm having to teach her habits. The other day she went to school, and her mother and I were had to get on her case because she went to school, and every day we give her we're in Vietnam, so it goes further, but we give her about 50 cents for, if she wants to get a milk or a snack. And, and that is what she gets every day, no more. And, she knows she's going to get that to us. But there are occasionally, the school has a little canteen and they sell stuff. And the kids all see things they like. Well, suddenly there was a habit that started in class with they would borrow from other kids. And so today, 3 days ago, she came up to us and she's like, "Daddy, Mommy, I need like 60,000. We're like, "Whoa, what for?" And what we found is that she actually didn't tell us the truth. She told us the teacher needed the money, but then we called the teacher and said, what is this fee for? It's not a lot of money, but we're still 60,000 Vietnam dong is like $3. And we were like, what is this about? We want to know because our daughter's asking us for this money to pay you. And we found out that she had gotten, a little bit of money from one of her friends, about $2. And we were like, oh, okay. So we had to have this conversation with her about borrowing money, about, lending money, about what do you need, what do you not need. And I had this conversation with her about money, and I started talking to her about you got to have good money habits, and what are you buying? And she's like, well, it's this plastic toy. And I took her down to her room where there is an endless number of little cheap plastic toys that have been tossed by the wayside after a week. And I pointed them out to her and I said, like these? Yeah, kind of like these. And I said, is it something that you really need? And so I sat there and I told her, okay, I will help you buy that. But you're going to do something for me. I want you to wait 3 days. See if you still want it. And so day number 1, oh, can I please get the money? No. We got to wait 3 days. Day number 2, I really still want it, Daddy. Day number 3 comes around and I said, is it something you still want? And she's like, actually, no, I don't want it anymore. Oh, it's kind of boring. My friend bought one and it just wasn't that interesting. We played with it in class and now I don't want that anymore.
Yeah. Reality
so again,
sets in.
I'm an amateur. And like you, I'm sitting there having to figure these things out. And so talking to you is great because, I like talking to people who've been through the fire, who've had these challenges and said, how can we right this ship? Because there are tons of books out there. And I find that the books and websites and everything that are either extreme here or extreme there. And it's...
Yeah.
People like you and information like you have, it's like, how do you transition from here to here? How do you make that crossing? Because it's a daunting thing. I feel like walking through the Red Sea. There's oceans on either side, and I'm like, how am I going to make it through this thing?
Yep.
How did you guys, what was the catalyst that got you started?
So for us, it was having to file bankruptcy just because we had gotten in over our heads. We tried some like credit counseling places for over a year, I think, and nothing was working. And that was really embarrassing for me because I was actually going to get a master's degree in finance, and I was like, how can I figure out like
Wow.
corporate finances is easy, like that's no problem for me, but my own personal finances, like how can I not figure this stuff out? And it is just so different. And like you said, there isn't a really good roadmap for most of it, or at least for me. Like you had said, I didn't grow up learning about any of this. I had no idea what a credit score meant, or even how to get out of debt once I got into it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that was our catalyst, was having to file bankruptcy, and we're like, oh man, we've definitely got to change something, because if we don't, we're going to end up back here again, and we didn't want to do
Yeah.
that. So
It's a couple years ago, my father had my dad actually was the picture of health most of his life, exercised, ate healthy, but genetics is genetics sometimes. And he went in, he wasn't feeling so good. He had his heart checked out, and he had some blockages. So he went in to the doctor, and he actually had a bypass surgery. Recovered, everything was great, and he has kept and stayed out of that problem. His recovery was total. He was great. But was one of the interesting things is when we were there talking to the doctor, um, the cardiologist looked around the ward, didn't focus on any one person, but said, he says the challenging part for me as a cardiologist is that in 3 or 4 years, all these people will be back. He said the challenge is that most people's habits that got them in here to this clinic to receive bypass surgery will continue. And he says it's really hard for people to change these negative habits when, first of all, these things become so ingrained, and second of all, they don't know how. They don't know what they should change. It's like I grew up eating a steak 3 times a day. Obviously, for most people, we're going to go, that's probably not sustainable, long term. But this person might go, well, that's what I grew up with, and they don't know any better.
totally normal.
And you
Yeah,
can't fault them for them. Totally normal. You can't fault them for it. But those habits, you do see people that have these problems will then get back into that problem again. And
oh yeah,
it's challenging.
it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how we got started,
So
trying to get out of that.
that's on, right. So when you were sitting down and bankruptcy had been filed, and you were sitting there before you started crafting your own book and stuff, where did you start looking for inspiration? What was it that was like, what were the sources? What was the guidance that you started turning to? Or was this stuff that you all started just going, hey, let's figure this out ourselves?
I started with Google. I think that even existed back then. I think it was Google. I think that's what it was called. But yeah, just looking online, trying to find anyone who had an information on just how to budget, how to manage your money.
Yeah.
And I found a place called Get Rich Slowly. A guy named J.D. Roth. He was a blogger at the time. I don't know if he even does it anymore. But that idea of that it didn't need to be quick, it didn't need to be exciting, because I knew those things were wrong. I knew just from
Yeah.
my own experience that I wasn't going to get out of this fast. It wasn't going to be, like invest in cryptocurrency type things. That didn't exist back then, but those kinds of ideas, like that wasn't going to work for me. So I really liked his concepts of just, it's going to take a long time. And it's just about spending less than you earn somehow. And he didn't have the answers either. He was kind of like you, just going through the journey and just blogging about it at the time. And that's where I went to for the start of our inspiration, was just, how do we do this? And it's totally okay if this is slow and it takes a while.
Yeah. There was last week I had this opportunity, and I've been working through some career changes, and I just got a new gig working for a big podcaster in the States, doing some of the community management, which is absolutely awesome. I'm loving it.
Yeah.
It's a side hustle, but it is one of the things that I'm doing, and it's helped financially. It has helped me, pull in some extra income, which is a great thing, and I'm happy about that. But I got this. There was a posting for a game show. Mr. Beast is having the biggest game show in history. Prize a pot of $5 million, over 1,000 contestants, and on a whim, I was up late and I was just like submitted for it. And they called me. They're like, we'd love for you to come on. And I started thinking about this, and I was just like, ooh, could I, 1 in 1,000 odds to win $5,000. And I started putting this out there. And then I was like, do I want to go on this? And one of the things that and then really quickly, I was like, no, it's not a smart investment. Maybe you could be that person who wins $5 million, but most likely you're going to be the guy who trips over himself in the first round, fall down on your face, and be like, and the challenge was, and I don't have any problem with that, but there's no pay for that, and that's time away from other things I'm doing. And I have my YouTube channels, my podcast. I have stuff that I'm working on, and I don't want to abandon that. And one of the things that I sat down talked to one of my friends who's really good at finances. And why I bring this up, because it was just I woke up in the middle of the night and I was giving hilarious answers to the survey, which is why they liked me. Just like putting the stupid answers out there that were just my middle of the night. Like I couldn't sleep, and I was just like, this is fun to submit. But one of the things my friend and I talked about afterwards, and she was like, real wealth happens slowly. If you have something that looks too good to be true, and it sounds like this 1 in a million chance, even if it's 1 in 1,000, it's probably not a great move. It's probably something that's going to put you into a place that isn't necessarily beneficial, and could actually be extremely detrimental.
Yeah. There's downsides they don't talk about.
Right? And, for me, and I had that was one of the big things for me, because I have extreme food allergies. I can't eat most things. And so here, a production that's going to be possibly traveling around the world, and then I'm sitting there going, how would I figure out my food? It's like I eat rice and beans and vegetables every meal. That's my go-to fare. So I could end up getting sick. I could end up having problems. And that's, again, where I'm talking about this opportunity that seemed in the moment fun, seemed exciting. But the reality was, it wasn't stable. It wasn't sustainable. No. There was a great Key and Peele sketch that I was watching last night. And it had these two criminals. And they're sitting there talking to each other. And this guy's like, I've got this great way to rob the bank. And he's like, oh, really? He's like, yeah. So we go there and we start staking it out. Oh, cool. And then what we're going to do, we're going to apply for jobs. Doesn't matter about the job. We just apply for the job. And the guy's like, really? Yeah, we apply for the job. And you know what? And we get in and then we start showing up. And you know what they do? They start putting money in our bank account every week, every 2 weeks, every month. And the other guy's like, really?
Yeah.
And he's like, and then you know what we do? We show up for 20 years. And then after 20 years, we walk out the front door. And he's like, and they've been giving us the money. We've been robbing the bank the whole time. And
the whole time.
And the other guy was like, man, that's a job. That's a job. And the funny part is that, when you phrase it that way, it's not flashy. But at the end of the day, you're still winning. You're still winning. And that's what's important.
Yeah. You're still having an income. You're getting what you wanted. That freedom, everything else that you were looking for the whole time. The stability, it's amazing.
Right?
Oh, I was just going to say, I know a lot of people don't like working for the man. And honestly, even in today's climate and everything else, I don't know how many people can work for the man for 30 years or whatever it is. But man, if you can do that, it is not a bad option, because it really does work out.
Yep. What was your What? Talk to me. You have a special budgeting. Talk to me about your system. What is your system?
So it's pretty much just that you forecast all of the income that you think you're going to make, and then you forecast all of the fixed expenses, like your bills, for about 2 years, and then you take the rest and divide that into weekly amounts, and you just live on a weekly allowance. Which it sounds too good to be true. It sounds too easy, but man, it is incredibly nice to live that way. That's why we ended up writing an entire book about it, just because there were so many unexpected benefits to that. And when we
Yeah.
figured it out, we weren't looking ahead 2 years. At the time, I was in school, and we just needed to make it till the next time we got student loans. We were just living off student loans. That was our
I,
only income.
I've been there.
You've been there.
I've been
Yeah,
there.
it is. Yeah,
I
it
just
can be tough. And so we had looked at lots of different budgets. We had failed at pretty much everything. And we were like, let's just try to make it until the next time we get our student loans. Like, we know what our fixed expenses are. It's really easy because we were early on in our marriage, and everything was included in our rent. So it was one number. And we said, okay, that's what our fixed expenses are. So how do we make it until the next time we get paid? And we're like, let's just divide it into weeks. And as long as we don't spend more than that each week, we're definitely going to make it. Like, that's what the numbers say. Let's see if it actually works. And that changed our whole life. It was absolutely amazing. And like I said, there were so many more benefits than what I could have imagined. It was just so helpful. So yeah, that's what we ended up coming up with. And again, it sounds too easy to be true, but it really does work. It's pretty amazing.
That's awesome. The one of the things that I like the most is I studied medicine for a time before I abdicated, dropped out, and moved back to Asia. But one of the things that was interesting, I'm actually still continuing my studies part-time remotely, but in a much better financial place, and doing it as I pay as I go versus student loans again, because I still have too many that I'm paying down. But one of the things that was important in medicine is that before you can treat a condition, you have to know what condition it is. You can't say, "Hey, let's treat this person." What is the diagnosis? Not quite sure. I mean, certainly in Western medicine, you can treat symptoms. You can say, "Okay, you've got a headache. Let's treat pain." But for long-term treatment, you need to know what's causing the headache. You got to sit there and you got to figure out what it is that's causing the problems. And that transparency. And this is one of the interesting things when people go to a doctor and they're trying to come in and ask for help. One of the big problems is that there is fear about seeing what the problem is. And I think that in our finances, it's also the same. I think people sit there and go, they're scared to look at what is the outflow? Where's it going? What's the inflow? Because what if you look at it and the outflow is much higher than the inflow, which is the problem that most people have. And that's why the credit card debt starts going up until there's no more that you can pull out of those credit cards, or there's no more that you can pull out of anything else. And then you start sitting there and you have to make these choices. But the idea of having a budget at the beginning where you can sit there and go, well, hang on, we already know what we're spending. And it's here. It's very clear. Yeah. You can look at last month's expenses and you can forecast. And then you sit there and you don't have to get into that situation where you have to call the friend or the cousin or the neighbor or whoever it is that you then have to go and make that uncomfortable call to ask for help, And so there is a solution.
There is. It just takes some effort. Most of the people that I've talked to who are in pretty hard financial trouble, it's not because they don't make enough. That is a situation that is an issue for some people, but most people that I've talked to, at least, it's because they just were trying to be ignorant because it's easier to be ignorant.
Hmm.
It's you don't have that panic. You don't have to look at the income and the outflow. Um, you don't have to get into the numbers because it's hard. It is hard to be like, how much do we spend on that? Why do we do that? Those are hard questions, and especially when you're in a marriage. Um, those are some heated conversations about
Yeah.
values, because one person, I absolutely guarantee, is going to value something more than the other person, and not just
Yeah.
more, but the other person's going to be like, why would we ever spend money on that? And
Yeah.
the one spouse is going to be like, no, that is a necessity. That is not even in the want category.
Hmm.
That is a need. And you're gonna be like, no, that shouldn't even be on the want list. That that shouldn't even be anywhere close to any of these
100%.
lists. It
Yep.
is. There is so much going on there, man. Yeah, those are hard conversations.
You touch on something that's interesting that I don't know. I'm sure other couples have it, but it's definitely something that we bump into in my marriage. Is that there are these cultural differences about money. My wife is Vietnamese and I am American. And one of the big differences that I noticed right from the get go is the entertainment expense. For me, entertainment expense is going to be, I love going to a movie. I love things that we can have around the home. But for my wife and her family, there are these big dinners like that.
Oh,
Eating is a huge part of their culture. It's a huge part of their culture. So there are these meals that we will go out to that will be 12, 15 individuals, and everyone contributes, but there are multiple times where we've paid more than everyone else, and I sit there, and for me, I'm sitting there going, is this necessary? Is this a thing that is important? But from them, from their cultural viewpoint, yes. This is one of those events
yes,
that is a
absolutely.
fabric that binds type of event. Yeah, this is a cultural cornerstone, and so these are an important expense. And so when we, there have been times where we have butted heads where I'm like, how about just the three of us going to a less fancy place, versus the whole crew. And again, and I'm not saying one way is right or the other. I think both of them have their merit. Both of them have their value to the given culture. But it does lead to these moments where there are some conversations where you're like, it gets tricky
It's
at
tough.
times. It gets tough.
Yeah, yeah.
What are some of the things that when you were laying out your budget, what are some of the tools that you put into place to assist you? What were some of the things that you did to make sure you stuck to your budget?
So again, we kind of fell into our budget in the system that we have, um, and the only tool we had was stay within that weekly allowance. It it doesn't
Mm.
matter uh, what you're spending it on. I don't care, but we need to make those decisions together, and we have to stay within that number because we can't make it until the next pay period if we go over that number. It's not going to work. So that is at, at the beginning. I think we just had a piece of paper. We would write it down every day, and we would just say, okay, I spent this much. This is what we have left. I think we moved on to like a little whiteboard type thing. We would just write the number at the end of the day and say, this is what I spent, and this is what I've got left. This is what we need to make it until the next week starts. And that was all we had, and it worked amazingly
Yeah.
well because we had to talk to each other every day and say, this is the money I spent, and you can't hide it, you can't lie about it because we don't have enough
Yeah.
to make it if you do that. So we were lucky, I guess, in a way, to have those kinds of constraints where we had to be completely honest. There was not a penny that could be hidden anywhere because we weren't going to make it otherwise. And we were both on the same page of we just need to make it to that next pay period. How do we do that? And that I helped us a lot just to be able to say this is our only goal. And so we've got to talk about everything we spend money on. Whether it's
You,
diapers,
you hit
whether
on
Whether it's
Yeah.
food, whatever it is, we've got to talk about it beforehand because we can't talk about it afterwards because then it's already gone.
Yep. 100%. You talk about two things there that I want to tap on. The first is sometimes just being in that place of survival is so important. Like you learn really quickly that there it. I remember one time when I was living in LA. I moved up to LA, was working multiple jobs in grad school as well, and I was still working at the same time. And this month I hadn't budgeted right. I don't know what had happened. I think I had an unexpected car expense, and it put me over the line. And I had 3 days left until my paycheck came through, and I had $50, and I bought what I could. But then the last day, like a day and a half till my paycheck came, I was sitting there. I had no money, and I was no food, and so I had to make this choice. Do I feed myself tonight, or do I feed my dog? So I went and bought a hamburger from McDonald's, took it home, gave it to my dog. I took a little piece of bread. And my mom always knows when things are not going right. And that night I got this, text message. I don't know why, but I feel like you need $50 in your account. And I just was like,
Oh, mom's
thank
the best.
you, Mom. Moms are the best. But, it made me, since that time, and there are people who have had this way worse than I have. But I will say that I've experienced hunger. I've experienced those days where there wasn't enough food to pay to enough money to buy food. There were days where, and mine was a choice because I went to graduate school and I had just stuff going on. But there are other people who don't have that choice, who have to go through that hunger. And I think that this is actually valuable. I think more people need that hunger at times. I think more people need to go through that experience to sit there and go, when you go through that hunger, when you go through those challenges, it wakes you up to, there is a seriousness to this. There is,
Yeah.
we've had very cushy lives for most people in the West for the past, 50 years. It has been pretty good,
Yeah.
Certainly there has been ups and downs. But when you look at other parts of the world, there's an interesting thing here in Vietnam. People still have an obsession with gold, and they will buy gold. And there's a reason for it, because when Saigon fell, 1975, all of the currency in that country became meaningless. So the people were very much aware that you have to be very careful with where you put money. It was also something that was of high value, that you could sneak out if you needed to escape. They would sew it into the clothes, and then they would, escape with those clothes on, and the gold would be hidden. Because they had to. There was this urgency, this need. And when you have to focus on how to survive and doing what you need to survive, you don't fail. Because there's no option to fail. You have to do it, and you have to do it right. And
That's
I
not
think
possible.
that not possible, right? There was also something too that you popped on there about writing things down on paper. And I think that we are now at a disadvantage in this digital era. I remember when I was a little kid, it was before internet banking, before you could go with an ATM to the bank. You would have checks. My mom would have the checkbook. And that checkbook had a running tally in there that she would,
Yeah.
every time she wrote a check, she would write down the new tally that was in her account. And the only way that she could completely verify if it was correct or not was to go to the bank and to check her balance with them and to check to see if each check had cleared. And that was this thing that she had to do. But if she didn't write it down, there was no, let's go online and look at our balance. There was nothing digitally tracking. And I know that these digital tools are so great, but they also can put a person at a disadvantage because you're not active in the process as you should be, as active as you should be. So I actually love this idea of writing everything down.
Yeah, it was helpful for us. Like what you're
Yeah.
talking about with Vietnam, that is, we are so amazingly lucky to have the consistency in our monetary system that we've had in America. It's such a big advantage that we take for granted because it is.
Hmm.
I mean, I can look out 40 years from now and decide what we're going to do and assume that that's probably going to happen. And there are so many places in the world that that's not even possible. Um, but yeah, also going back to writing things down. Yes, that is. I have talked to a few people, and uh, we tell them write everything down because you need to, in some form, even if it's in an app or something. And they'll usually say, "Well, my
Yeah.
my bank does that for me. It categorizes everything for me. I don't need to write it down." I'm like, "Oh man, but it would help you so much if you just wrote it down."
Yeah.
But I get it. It is hard.
Right.
I go days where I make 20 purchases in a day sometimes, and I have to go back
Yeah.
into my phone and be like, write every one of these down, and then go back to the bank account and look and see, did I get all of them? Because it is hard. It is so easy to spend money so fast, and especially if
It
you're just
is.
out doing errands for the day. Oh my gosh, it is so easy to forget one thing, and that'll throw everything off if you do. Yeah, it is so hard to
My
keep
wife
up.
and I, right? My wife will travel sometimes, and then I'll budget for the weekends while she's gone. And I withdraw some money, and then and I've got this certain amount of cash for the weekend, and then she leaves and she comes back, and then I was like, hey, the delivery's on the way. I don't have any cash on me right now. I can go to the bank and get some. And she's like, you just had, X number of dollars, $50. What did you spend it on? And I don't buy, I am very thrifty. I don't like to buy a lot of stuff. But then I sit there and I go, hang on, that's just been 3 days. What did I
Yeah.
buy? And I can't remember. I can't remember
Oh,
because it's it's like a day's gone and it's like you just forget, and then I can track it back. Oh yeah, that was a legitimate expense. Yeah, that was. But then it's like, well, hang on, how did I? It's $50. How did I lose? Where did it go?
yeah, yeah.
Just like that.
So fast. Yeah, yeah. Our goal usually is to get out of Costco for under $100, and that is the hardest thing in the world. Uh, it's just too easy to spend money,
Yeah,
and there's just
it
too many
really
things
is
you
so
want.
easy to right? If someone came to you, and they were dealing with financial challenges, what would you tell them right off the get go? What advice would you start off with?
So I know financial planners will start with like a vision of what you want your life to be, just to get you in that right frame of mind and all of those kinds of things. I am way more simple than that because that's not my job. I don't do that every day. So my goal with our budgeting system, uh, the reason I put it out there, we created a nonprofit just to be able to get it out there and make it free for everyone. Um, the first thing we do is we just sit down and say, what is your income going to be for the future? I don't care what mistakes you've made,
Hmm.
even up until today. It doesn't matter. I know you've made mistakes. You know you've made mistakes. That's why you're here. So going forward, what's your income going to be? Because that'll put you in an income first frame of mind. That'll help you start
Yeah,
with gratitude for what you already have. Like it's wonderful if
yeah,
you want vacations or whatever it is that you're aspiring for long term. That's wonderful, but it's not going to help you today. From my perspective, I'm just a simple
hmm,
minded person when that comes to that. It's just very literal. It's how do I make it right now? So what do I have? What's my income going to be? And specifically, just the income I know is going to happen. So like bonuses, tax returns, some of those side hustle things. I'm like, don't even count those because you have no idea if that's going to happen, and that
yeah,
is so much stress to put on yourself
yeah,
if you're depending on that just
yeah,
put food on your table, that is so much stress.
Yes.
If you don't have to, don't do that. So that's where we start out with. That is an income first frame of mind. Just what are you going to be making for the next year? Well, that's probably the wrong way to say it. What can you expect to be making? And then I'll forecast it in our spreadsheet for about 2 years. I know that's probably going to change at some point. You can come back and redo your budget whenever you want. But just having that longer term outlook. Start with your income, and then we move on to just your basic bills, the things that you know are going to happen, your mortgage, your all of those kinds of things, the bills, the stuff that you've already agreed to pay for, and that's all you need to focus on. Like, don't get into groceries and all the fun stuff that you want to buy every day. It's just what's your basic income and what are your fixed expenses, just your bills. And how are you going to cover those? And then in our spreadsheet that we have, that I have out there for free, because this is kind of hard to do on pencil and paper, even though I do like pencil and paper for a lot of things. There's benefits to it.
Yeah.
But an Excel spreadsheet does this really well. You can schedule out the timing of all of your income, all of your fixed expenses, and then you can look at that and say, how do I divide that into a weekly amount so that I can just have an allowance to work with? And then the spreadsheet will help you find a number that's actually going to work so that you're never going to go negative. You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then once you have that allowance, you get to figure out what to do with that. It's like being a kid again, but you're an adult, and so you're a little more responsible, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to figure it out what that looks like for you. You know this is your limit. And it's the same way we teach little kids. But it's more real life, because you've already thought about the hard things. You've already decided, I'm keeping my job. You've already decided that. You've decided what bills you're going to pay. That's all taken care of. You don't have to worry about those things day to day. You can even put your bills on auto pay and totally forget about them if you want, because the spreadsheet's already told you this is what's going to happen in the timing of it. It's all going to work out. You're going to be okay. So if you just focus on this allowance, this weekly allowance, it's short. It's a short period of time. If you make a mistake and you end up with no money for 2 days, you'll probably be okay. It's not going to be the worst thing in the world. It'll be a little bit of pain, and that's probably good. It's a good learning experience, but it's not going to be the worst. It's not going to be the end of things. And you can always see, 7 days away isn't really that far, even at the beginning, especially once you get closer to that. I think I can do this. And there's amazing power in being able to work it out for yourself and have it be completely different week by week. 1 week we can do eating out and do all the parties and everything else, and another week it's home renovations or whatever else we need to do that week. And it can completely change week by week. And when you have kids, you'll be forced to change week by week, whether you like it or not.
Right? It's so true. And one of the things too, I love about what you're saying to me is the idea of an allowance, because it's something that a lot of people can relate to. You grow up with this weekly amount that you're able to receive and you're able to work from, and it's clear, it's defined. And I think that we all have that. Kind of like the monkey mind part of us, it's a term that they ooh, shiny things, ooh,
Yes.
It's that non-thinking mind, not that higher rational mind, but the ooh, and you get at something, and that part of us can take over, and it's just do I need this right now? Is this important? Last night, I still teach part-time as something that I do for kids here in Asia. And I was teaching my students, and the words that we were teaching were 3 words. Want to, ought to, and need to. And it was a great lesson for kids. And, it was like, what do you want to do? What do you need to do? And wants and needs is such a foundational thing. And when you have a budget, one of the most important things with a budget is to start thinking, if you only have let's say $50 a week that you're spending, right? Maybe it's a little kid or someone, and that's what they've got. I'm just picking a random number. You're 50. You're going to sit there and go, is this important? Is that important?
Right.
And you really have to start hammering on priorities. And like you said, and those difficult conversations with your partner and such, because we all prioritize different things. But there is also a very clear, right? There are things that food is a need. And what type of food? Well,
Yeah, what type of food? That's
differ.
the hard part.
That's the hard part. We must eat. Well, do we order out pizza every day from the expensive pizzeria up the street? Or do we, if you really need that pizza, do we make it ourselves? Go and get the stuff and then you make it. Might not taste as good in the beginning, but, you're operating within that budget. Or do you say, you know what? No. I need that really nice pizza from up the street. Well, I can't afford it every day. So I'll get it one day a week, and the rest of the days of the week I can do something else. Those priorities, when you have a framework and you know how do you make it work? I think back to early, did you ever see that Tom Hanks movie, Apollo 11? I love that movie.
Yeah.
And it was a Ron Howard movie. Tom Hanks plays an astronaut on the Apollo 11. Apollo 13, not 11. Apollo 11 was the one that went to the moon, right?
No.
13.
11 was different.
Yeah. So 11 was different. Apollo 13, they went, into space, and when they get to space, they had a massive failure of a certain system, and the astronauts were essentially dead unless they found a solution. And so they pulled together a team of engineers and said, this here, all the stuff in this room is what they have in space. We now need to, with this, create a ventilation system so that these guys don't die in the next 48 hours. And they did it. And it's still probably one of the most amazing feats of engineering that these guys were able to absolutely MacGyver this thing together in a short period of time, halfway across space. These guys were out, and we're not talking about the communication systems. It's nuts.
Yeah.
But they had to, again, evaluate what they had access to.
Yeah.
Okay? And once they had that, they were able to sit there. Right? You've got to make choices. What were some of the choices that you made? What were some of the things that you started going, you know what, that's not a need, that's more of a want? What were some of the things that you had to choose when you were early on in this budget?
Clothing was a big one for us. Because I would like to buy clothes all the time. My wife was like, that is not a priority. We do not need to spend our money on that. She would rather have experiences, kind of like what you had talked about, where you're like, she wants a big holiday. And to me, I didn't grow up with big birthdays, big holidays. None of that mattered to my parents. So I didn't think it was a big deal. But it was a big deal to her. So those are the kinds of things where I had to be like, okay, is buying new clothes, is that a big important thing we do every week, or do we do big holidays, or do we just schedule for those big holidays and then see what's left over? And it's hard, but it is so much easier when it's week by week because it's so much smaller. When you've got like a monthly typical budget, those little decisions, they build up so much. By the time you realize it's a problem, you've had so many of them.
Yes.
You don't even know where to start to fix them. But when you do it week by week, and when you're seeing, I've only got this much left every time you do something, man, it makes it so much easier, so much faster to have those conversations. And just to talk to each other and say, wait, is that really important? And again, to have those conversations before you spend the money, because after, it will not go as well.
My wife and I were talking. There's a new TV show out that's kind of controversial, and it was on Netflix called Baby Reindeer, and it's about these people that have this lady with severe mental health issues who becomes a stalker of this other character. And I'm not talking about the show, not talking about anything else in there, but there was one point where this woman allegedly sent 50,000 emails to this person that she was obsessed with over a 2-year period. And, my wife and I were like, that's insane. That's a lot. How
That's
can
a
you
lot.
even do that? But then I was like, hey, that's a lot. Let's break it down. So we started breaking it down by a year. Okay, 25,000 per year. We divided it by 365. And then suddenly it became a much more manageable number. I think it was like 50 or 54. And like my wife's like, that's still a lot. And I said, yeah.
It's doable.
I said, it's doable, like it's doable. I could sit there. I said, how many messages do we send each other back and forth per day? And so we went back and counted our text messages. There was easily 50 text messages in there. And I said, well, imagine someone's using an email instead of a text and they just send a quick thought. I said, it's doable. When you take something really big and you break it down into small measurable units, it becomes manageable. The pyramids, we look at the pyramids as these great giant monoliths, and how could these ancient people build these things, and everyone gets these wild and outlandish ideas. Well, one stone at a time.
Yep.
They didn't think about everything crazy. They sat there and said, how are we going to place this stone? This one?
Yeah. Just
right
the
here.
next one. Yeah.
Just the next one. Let's move this stone. And then they would put all of their force and energy into moving that stone and place it. And then they went back and did the next stone. And I think this is something that people just get overwhelmed with. When you have a financial problem, you look at the problem in front of you and go, oh my goodness, this is so insurmountable. I don't know how to tackle this.
Yeah, it is huge.
What can you do?
It's tens of thousands usually. That you're like, that's just, incomprehensible how you could even start.
It is. But yet you can also tackle things one step at a time. For me, I was dealing with a challenge of my problem was not making enough, because especially as inflation went up in the US and I was working overseas, it was very painful as the US dollar went up, and I was making the same pay here in Asia, and I was just like, ouch. So I got a second job, which has been great. And one of the things that I was able to do was they said, Sean, you're doing great. Would you like to work more hours? And I was like, yes. There we go. And just that incremental boost in hours put me in a better place. And it was something that seemed small, an extra hour each day, and an extra 2 hours each day. And then suddenly I was doing a full 40-hour work week for this new gig. And it was like, hang on now, it's a full-time job. And then I still have my old main job is now a side hustle. And it's like these little incremental steps can put you in a much better position. I think people forget the power of baby steps.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've loved Atomic Habits, and I think there's another book called Tiny Habits.
Right.
It is amazing what you can do. And again, that's one of the side benefits of our budgeting system is you start out with this big view so that you're making this huge plan. You're deciding how you want that pyramid to look just in general. And then you can break that down and say, okay, what blocks do we need to put in place to make that happen? It is powerful when you start with the big picture, but you don't get overwhelmed by it because you don't have to tackle it all at once. And then you break that down into just what's the next thing I need to do. Man, it is amazing what you can accomplish just one little step at a time.
I have this vision for my family. I want a house in the mountains with a small barn and a horse or two. People might go, what? What is that? You know what? I am nowhere near that. And I'm not going to go try to but it's my pyramid. It's something simple. I grew up
Yeah.
with horses. I grew up with, you know, it was something that was beautiful for me. I am in no place able to anywhere go near that for the next who knows how many years. And if I sit there and go, how am I going to create that? It will make me crazy. But if I sit there and I sit there, what can I do to get out of debt today? What can I do to
Yeah.
work on my spending today? Those are manageable. You have to have that pyramid vision, and then when you know that, it gives you something to work for. It gives you something to hope for, Because I also think, too, one of the things that for me I find is important is you can't lose hope. You have to keep your hope, that you can make the decisions to right your ship. You can make the decisions for things to
Yeah.
get better.
Yeah. So that's we came up with our debt payoff spreadsheet because of that idea that people are in usually when you're hitting rock bottom and you are forced to learn how to budget because you have to. You don't have another choice. You're usually in some amount of debt, and it looks insurmountable, and there's not a lot of hope. So I didn't realize how closely that was tied to budgeting. I knew that's how you get into debt, is by not budgeting, but I didn't realize how big of a deal it is just to get the right path forward in order to be able to start getting out of debt. When we started, I would just tell people, just go look online and find some calculator, and it'll tell you which order to pay off your debts. That's not that hard. But to them it was. They couldn't handle that. Because, again, these aren't numbers people. These aren't Excel people. If they were, they wouldn't be in this situation,
Yep.
most likely.
Yes.
So I ended up taking all of those different spreadsheets, and I showed them to my wife, who is not a numbers person at all. And she was like, I don't understand any of this. And I was like, okay, hypothetically, you want to get out of debt. What would you want to see to help you just get on the right path? Like, apparently seeing penny by penny what that's going to look like is too much. So what would you want to see?
Yeah.
And she was like, just give me the steps. Like, tell me what to do first. What do I do next just to get out of debt? And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, what would that look like for you? And she's like, well, just tell me the payment I need to make and how long I'm going to have to make that. And that's all I need to know. I don't need to know what the amortization schedule looks like. I don't need to know what the interest rates look like or any of the other nerdy stuff that is on so many spreadsheets. And I was like, oh, that is interesting because I would have never thought that way. I like seeing all the interest rates. I like seeing, down to the penny month by month.
Yeah. I think some people just need, tell me what I have to pay.
Yes. So I ended up creating a debt payoff spreadsheet that did that. And it is confusing for people who love normal spreadsheets because it just says step 1, pay this amount on this credit card and this amount on the next credit card and this amount on the next one. And just do that for like 12 months and it'll tell you how many months on there.
Yeah.
And then move on to the next step because that's going to help you pay off the first card. Your next step, pay off this next thing. And you're just going to pay these amounts, and you're going to do that for like 10 months. And it's going to start getting faster. That's the snowball effect. But they didn't want to see all of the detail, all of the whole amortization schedule for each one, which, again, to me, totally interesting, but not very actionable for a lot of people.
Well, I want to, first of all, we're coming up on an hour here. Where can people go to reach out to you to find your information about what your website and things like that? How should people look you up?
Yeah, so we're at happygiraffe.org. I set up a nonprofit just so we could make this free for as many people as possible. And none of us get paid. It's really just me and my wife. We don't get paid for any of this. It's just our time to volunteer. Happy to help anyone that needs it. We have people from all over the world. We got a Google Ads grant. So we get about $10,000 a month just for Google Ads, all for free, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
So we reach people all over the world, and it's incredible to see people from Pakistan, South Africa, the Philippines, like just everywhere. There's people who need help, and they can't pay for it. They're not in a position to be able to pay a financial planner to help them get out of debt or start budgeting. We get about
Right.
200 people a day that download one of our spreadsheets, and that's just amazing. I can't even imagine that we would have gotten that kind of reach
That's awesome.
when we started this. But yeah, that's where you can find us. The Happy Giraffe came just because of the story at the beginning of our book. We wanted to make budgeting a little more interesting than it normally is, because it's a pretty boring topic. And especially if you do it right, it's a long-term, boring thing. Hopefully, once it's all set up, it's in the back of your
Yeah.
head, and you really never have to pay attention to it full-time again. It doesn't have to be front of your mind all the time. And that's one of the things that I have enjoyed. We've been on this for about 10 years now. We've been using this budget, and it is amazing the mental, I don't know, just not space. Not space, that's probably not the right way to say that.
Yeah.
The mental not space that my budget takes up is incredible. Because it doesn't matter, payday,
That's
when,
awesome.
when that's coming up, that doesn't matter. When bills are coming up, that doesn't matter. It's all automated. And I just have to pay attention to that weekly amount. That's all that matters to me. And it is so much, it's such a smaller thing to worry about. So yeah, we tried to make it interesting. We tried to make it more fun than a normal budget. But yeah, we thought giraffes were a good idea for that.